Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. Today is episode 49. I'm your host, Phil Huber. I'm joined today by John Doyle and Logan Whitmer. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about taking care of your tools. Also, what about modifying your tools? So it's kind of a fun discussion about how we view our tools and how we use them in our own workshops. So I hope you enjoy listening. Just a reminder, today's episode is brought to you by Inventables, a new CNC solution for your business. Make bigger projects faster with the X-Carve Pro. You can see it in action at xcarvepro.com. It's hard to believe that this is episode 49.
Right.
Almost a year.
Yeah.
When will it end?
Yeah. 2020 or the podcast?
Both.
We didn't stop at episode 50, right?
All I know is we didn't have these problems in the world before we started podcasting.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Although, to be fair, like podcasting kind of gives us something to do. Well, I do it from home. You guys are
Right.
in the office, but yeah.
You were going to sit in your shop and talk anyway, so might as well
I was
record
to
it.
myself. Might as well talk to somebody.
Yeah.
I will say I don't think that I personally blame the Iowa caucuses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's where everything went south.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't figure out. It was a nice bookend for the year because we start the year not knowing how to count an election, and we end the year with people wondering whether we know how to count an election.
Right.
Yeah. You know,
with a pandemic like sandwiched in the middle like the cream filling of an Oreo.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the cream filling of an Oreo either, so like it just is full circle.
Yep.
I always tell my wife, if I could buy Oreo cookies without the filling, I would. Like, hate me all you want, but I would.
Because, yeah, they do Oreos that are like super thick or super thin now, but it's just like just the cookies is the next iteration.
Yeah, and I think it'd be fantastic.
Because I have a couple of nieces that will not eat Oreos unless they're the birthday cake Oreos.
I've
which
never had
to
those.
me kind of makes me throw up a little bit in the back of my mouth. And then I don't know, John would remember, this was long before Logan was of age, but on the TV show, was it Don or Brian would bring in double stuffed Oreos?
I think Brian. That sounds like a Brian thing.
Yeah, and I just and I just can't do double stuff. Even it's just too much.
See, for me, is double stuff is like the baseline now. Like that's the regular stuff.
See, I like the ratio, or if I'm gonna have, like, I just don't care for the texture of the filling. Like the taste is fine. It's like an oily, weird, fake filling.
It's like lard
thing.
with sugar.
Little gritty.
Yeah, basically, yeah. It's whipped Crisco with sugar. Like gross. But there are certain ratios, right? Like double stuffed is too heavy ratio. I can do regular, right? Regular Oreos, good ratio. Same thing with peanut butter cups. Like regular peanut butter cups, okay ratio. You go to Easter egg peanut butter cups, perfect ratio.
Oh, yeah? Because that leans a little heavier on the peanut butter side.
It does, yeah, perfect ratio. Which I'm not a huge peanut butter fan, but perfect ratio.
So you're a chocolate in your peanut butter rather than a peanut butter in your chocolate kind.
That's right. That's right. So, are we talking about woodworking today?
So we might.
Do we have
to?
Okay. We don't have to.
We're closing in at the end of the year. People are kind of winding down a little bit anyway. These last few of the year should be a little celebratory.
Right. Yeah. This is when we start coasting.
Yeah, everybody's given up on us already. We might as well give up on ourselves too.
Yep. Yep. I have my sweatpants on. Gave up on life. So, okay. So today's topic, what was it? We were talking about something as a group. I don't remember where it came up with, or somebody had just kind of mentioned how you take care of your tools. Because there are on one hand, there are folk that look at their tools as mystical artifacts that need to be pampered, so to speak,
Sure.
cared for immaculately. And then there are the people who view all chisels as pavement splitters. Leave them out in the rain.
Yep.
Refer to sharpening with a question mark at the end of it.
Sharpen on a concrete slab.
Yeah. So that's where I was kind of wanted to go with this is maybe how each of us has viewed our tools in the past and, like where are you now in terms of how you see your tools or whatever. And then the corollary of it is how free do you feel to modify tools?
Okay.
Anybody, go.
So my hand tools, I don't pamper them. I'm looking right now. If you guys feel like I'm looking above you, I'm looking at my tool cabinets right now. I don't pamper them. I have holders made for all my, right behind you, Phil. I have holders made for all my hand tools. I have sawtill, my chisel holders, my different coping and fret saws. My nicer hand tools, I treat them with respect. So okay. I guess that's the best way for me to put it. Do they get wiped down with oil after every time I use them? No, they don't. Do I leave them out in the garage if I take a block plane into the garage to clean up some lumber quick to check the grain before I bring it inside? No, I don't leave it in the garage. I bring it back inside. So I guess with my hand tools, I generally I treat them as users. I appreciate a well-made hand tool, and I have no problem purchasing a well-made hand tool. But I'm not purchasing, my blue spruce chisel set. I have 6 of them. They're an expensive chisel set, but I use them like any other chisel set that I use, except for my Stanley Fat Max. That's my glue scraper. So I guess what I'm getting at is when I purchase a tool, a hand tool in particular, I purchase it to use it. I'm not the type of guy that is a collector of hand tools. I try not to be a collector of hand tools, which I think most collectors lean towards the don't use them.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I'm very much if it doesn't get used, it doesn't have a place in my shop. I mean, that's kind of where I have went in my tool. I don't want to say tool collecting, but in my tool purchases. And it's been a long path to get to that point, for myself to get to that point where I realize if I don't use it, I don't need it. And if I don't use it, I don't want it in my shop because it's another thing in my shop cluttering it, right? As far as like my power tools, I know there are guys that will dust off their tools. They'll blow them off, vacuum them off every time they use them. They follow if it's an old router, they'll replace bearings every couple of years in them. I'm not that guy. I don't want to say that I feel like my power tools are more disposable than my hand tools, but I wouldn't argue with that. I have a whole lot less affinity for as much as I love my Bosch Colt router. And that's not the tool I'm grabbing. Last week we talked about what tool you're grabbing if your shop's on fire. Not grab my Bosch router. To me, that's a pretty low thing on my totem pole. So
yeah, that seems like the case with things like hand tools with motors or batteries. It's like the batteries die, and that's the most expensive part of those tools, or motors go out, and then it's just kind of worthless. You kind of take care of them best you can, but they wear out a lot faster than well-made hand tools.
Yeah. Well, so. And like my larger power tools, so like my bandsaw, my table saw, those ones, I mean, I do take care of them, so they do get periodic waxings. You know, I know a lot of people always say, yeah, you should wax your table saw once every couple months. I actually do, because that table saw, my saw stop, was the most expensive tool I've ever purchased, the sawmill aside. That's the most expensive tool I've ever purchased. So yeah, I'm trying to keep it nice. So I wax the top. I don't generally try to put stuff on it. I say that and make sure there's nothing sitting on it right now. I don't generally try to put stuff on it that's going to scratch it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it's going to happen. And when it does, whatever, I'm not going to cry over spilt milk, but I try to keep it looking pretty decent, looking as nice as I can, because I'm the type of guy that I like my tools to look good. I feel better about using them if my tools are in good shape. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I guess, you know, long roundabout answer to your question, Phil. I like my tools to look good. I don't care if my power tools are dusty, but I don't, if I drop my router and I crack the base plate on it, I'm going to go buy a new base plate for it.
Right.
Instead of gluing it together and fixing it. I guess that's kind of where I fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like if you like wax your tools regularly, they're going to look a lot better in a swimsuit. So,
yes, they will. Yep, John's exit
That's a walk
stage
off.
left.
That was a walk off.
Yeah.
Wow.
But you know, I mean, you guys get what I mean, though, right? Like,
right.
The tool does perform better if it's waxed.
Yeah.
Am I going to, if you know, if I scratch up the paint on the table of my bandsaw, am I going to go out and buy Powermatic touch-up paint? Nope, because I don't. I mean, it doesn't affect it that much. You know, there are. You know, so I had this happen with my my first Lee Nielsen's that I ordered. I ordered a number 7, a 4.5, and a scrub plane, all in one order, right? And I got the 4.5, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I was standing in the editor shop when we used to have the CNC room, used to be our editor shop. And I was like, yeah, you know, I had a couple other Lee Nielsen like block planes and other Lee Nielsen tools, but this is the first time I had actually sold all my vintage tools to buy a couple nice Lee Nielsens. And I grabbed this 4.5, and we had a piece of curly maple. It was a huge chunk. I don't know if it was from it must have been from like the smartphone amps or something like that. And I was like, all right, this is a good test. I'm just gonna plane this bad boy and see what this thing can do. And I made a couple passes, and I looked at the sole, and the sole had scratch lines on it. I was like, what the heck? You know, like I've never, brand new, first time I used it, I was like, there's nothing. I mean, I'm planing curly maple. It kind of bothered me a little bit that the sole got scratched up, but I quickly got over it because I'm like, you know what? I'm going to use this thing, and who cares if the sole gets a little scratched up? I mean, if I cared that much, I would throw it on some 600 grit sandpaper and smooth it back out.
Yeah.
You know,
but then you'd be doing that
deal.
like every time you used it.
Well, yeah, exactly. And, you know, I always tried to baby my planes, keep the totes all nice, you know, avoid dings in the totes. I would, if I had to bring them in for a video or a photo or something, I would put them in my toolbox all nice so the handles didn't get dinged. And now I'm like, boom, drop it in there. I'm going all Chris Fitch on my tools and just kind of throwing them in, you know. Because, I mean, honestly, they're tools. I like them. Right. I love them. I use them all the time. But they're tools. I'm going to use them. Like I said, I will avoid as much damage to them as I can. I'm not going to leave them in the garage where they might, you know, get some rust on them. Not going to do that. But at the end of the day, they're tools. As long as they perform, that's what I need.
Yeah.
Yep. So how do you guys feel about modifying stuff? Like for me, I have a hard time drilling holes like in my cast iron tops to add stuff on, or
That's because your drill bits are dull.
Yeah. Yeah, I just have a hard time doing it. No, it's like trying to think of like if I've ever modified any power tool or anything like that. Like, hand tools like or old, chisels or screwdrivers, grind those down into other things. But I don't know, have a hard time otherwise messing with stuff too much.
See, and I have all of my tools are used to begin with, my machines and power tools. Mm-hmm. So I don't really feel, and they're in user condition. They're not any kind of mint, fully restored factory spec kind of condition. So I have no qualms about doing stuff. The bandsaw that I'm trying to sell has an cast aluminum table on it. And when I made the rip fence for it, I wanted a support. Well, I needed to be able to attach the rip fence to that table somehow. And then on the back side of the table, I added a long rail to support the fence for when the fence is off to the left and it's beyond where the table is. And I didn't know how to attach it because there were some holes in the table that came that way, and they weren't in the right spot and whatever. So I was talking to Chris about it, and he's like, just drill a hole in it. Like it's just a tool table, and being cast aluminum, the nice part is that the hole drilled really easily. And then I, ran a tap into it, and then I was able to thread it on, and then I didn't have to mess with, lock nuts and washers and stuff on the other side. I could just thread it right into the table and be done with it. So I don't have any problem with doing that. And I think the gateway drug to modifying power tools is with jigs. You start making jigs for it, for, like a router or table saw or drill press. And then all of a sudden you're, removing the depth stop and making a custom depth stop for it, or, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think the modifications, I think you can argue this with anything that you would modify, right? Vehicles, tools, whatever. Like the manufacturers designed them this way for a specific reason, right? Yeah. Now, there are instances where I'm sure routers get used in ways that router manufacturers don't want them to be used or didn't intend them to be used. But from that standpoint, I am always one to generally not modify a tool if I can help it. It's funny that we're talking about this today because last night I was I've been on a YouTube bend. My wife and oldest are gone for a couple days, so the youngest and I are kind of hanging out, and I'm on a YouTube bend. And I was watching some stuff with it was Michael Fortune is who it was, in his shop up in, I think, Toronto. And they have in Michael's shop, I think they have like 4 craftsmen in Michael's shop, but they have like 8 bandsaws. Right. Like they have a ton of them, and it's hilarious because almost all of them are like old Canadian made Generals, right? He has a handful of different ones, but I noticed that almost all of them have the Craig fence on them, the Craig bandsaw fence, right? And I'm like, okay, I think Phil does the saw you have now has it, right? Yeah. And it's a nice fence. I don't personally, so I have the Powermatic 14-inch. I don't like the stock fence. Like it feels like Powermatic said, "Hey, here's a pretty solid saw. That's all we're gonna do." Like the fence is kind of an afterthought. Like, oh, maybe we should put a fence on there, or they let the interns design the fence. Like, yeah, nobody really needs that. So I started looking at the Craig, or not necessarily the Craig fence, but I started looking at aftermarket fences last night. And there's a couple different manufacturers that make them, but every one of them has that little disclaimer that you may need to drill the cast iron table on your bandsaw. And I was like, I don't really want to do that. I hate drilling into cast iron. It's stupid and it sucks. But B, it's like, do I really want to put a bunch of holes in the saw table? And I might find one that fits in the stock holes, but it's just like, it was one of those things. It's like, I don't know how I feel about that, which is funny because we start talking about my sawmill. I'll bolt anything to that bad boy. Like, and I don't know where the distinction comes from in my mind, or it's like, it's okay to do it to the sawmill, not okay to do it to my bandsaw. Yeah. You know,
but even into the edge of the table, so it's not even a working surface.
Exactly. And you know, when it comes down to it, if I buy a bandsaw fence for it, or if I sneak an article into the magazine where I can get a bandsaw fence that will bolt onto it, at the end of the day, sure, I'll do it. But for some reason in my head, I'm just like, drilling into my pretty nice bandsaw. Don't know how I feel about that. So I don't know. It's just like my table saw behind me. ShopNotes at one point had designed a sliding table,
right?
For it was actually designed to fit on the Powermatic contractor saw, but I've always wanted a slider, and I'm like, I could take the wing off that thing and bolt it on, build one and bolt it on, and that would be awesome. And I don't remember, but I think you have to drill into the side. Well, on the Powermatic, you had to drill into the side of the saw to bolt it on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this. I just,
I think maybe it's the fear that it's like, oh, I'm going to maybe someday take this off, and then those holes are going to be there, and I'm just going to have to look at them with shame.
Yeah.
The shame.
Well, just, you know, and most of the time when I do modify a tool, I would say my biggest like modification, I don't modify hand tools. I know a lot of people do. A lot of people will grind a chisel into a skew chisel or a fishtail. I just haven't. Yeah, Phil. I'm anal retentive enough that if I want a fishtail chisel, I'll probably buy one to match my other chisels, just because I'm OCD like that. But as far as my modifications go, I like stuff I can just bolt on to existing holes and then take it off. You know, like my Bosch Colt is actually up in my truck right now. But if I can just bolt it to those existing plate holes, that's what I'm going to do. And would you call that modification? Probably not. It's an add-on. But, you know, I don't know.
Today's episode, just as a reminder, is brought to you by Inventables. Now, in addition to a bunch of the CNC gear and equipment and know-how that Inventables offers, they have a couple of CNC solutions, and there's a new one coming out, a larger format CNC machine that they're calling the X-Carve Pro. So you can take a look at their website for all their other solutions at inventables.com, or look dedicated at their site for the CNC at xcarvepro.com.
Yeah, Phil, you made some chisel handles here lately. And I don't know if that's a modification or upgrade because you were replacing plastic handles with wood ones.
It was a set of chisels that I got from my wife when we got married. And they were... I mean, the chisels themselves are pretty nice. The handles were okay, but I just like the look and feel of a wood handle. And for years, I had thought about trying to do it and never really pulled the trigger on it. But yeah, I would count that as a modification. So, I mean, I've also, you know, like what Logan said, I took a handle that looks just like very similar to the one that Logan's showing there. I took a half-inch chisel and I ground it into a skew chisel because I didn't have a skew chisel, and you know, it's not that big a deal to do on the grinder to change the angle on it, and I wasn't really out anything because it was a low-cost chisel. You know, one thing that made me that kind of got me a little bit more interested in thinking about modifying tools was Chris Fitch for ShopNotes, we did a project of making your own block plane, and the sides of the block plane were made from Damascus steel. So it has that really cool, grain pattern or whatever you want to call it in there. And he had a prototype that he had mocked up, and it just kind of sat because there were some flaws in it. And I took it because this is the kind of person I am, a rescuer of things, and thought
I thought you were going to say
no, because it was just going to get chucked. He had just the sole dovetailed to it. And
yeah.
Anyway, so I was going to finish the plane. I had written the article for it. But where the mouth of the plane, where it met the Damascus sides, had some burrs and just, from peening the dovetails, had some, just inconsistencies and bulges and whatever. And I was talking to Chris on what to do with it at that point, because, what can I do to fix it? Because it was tough to get a file in there, because otherwise you start filing the opposite side of the mouth, and that's not any good. And Chris was like, well, here's what I would do is you take a chisel and you grind a 45 or a 50 degree bevel on it. And then you squeeze the body of the block plane in a vise, and you basically pare away the steel with your sharpened chisel. And when he was describing this, I was just kind of you can pare steel with a chisel? That just didn't make any sense. But Chris said it, so it's got to be right, So I tried it. I had just kind of a junky chisel, and and you don't need much of. It's not like you're creating a huge bevel to get 45 degrees. You just kind of buzz it right up there. And I did it, and you just kind of brace the chisel against your chest and lean into it. And I was taking steel shavings with a chisel. And the funny part is so you get done with that, then you just go back over to the grinder, regrind it down to 25 degrees, and it's your woodworking chisel again. It kind of put its Clark Kent glasses and suit back on, and
nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
Now that I'm thinking about it, of course, this is typical Logan fashion. My mouth's running faster than my brain is. You guys have never seen that before. You're right, because I do have a handful of chisels that I've done that with. I've shown a couple on video for using the blunt
from Bill Carter
chisel technique that Bill Carter talks about, which is using a chisel that's ground at 90 degrees. It's not sharp, but the bottom corner works really well as a scraper. I've done that on a handful of chisels, a handful of gouges as well. So some half-inch radius gouges to shape wedges on planes. Same thing with this. This slick I was holding up earlier. This had a little stubby handle on it from the manufacturer, and I was like, you know what? I want a little bit longer handle. This one kind of matches the shape that we did, your chisels and my chisel handles out of, Phil. So, if you consider that a modification, making a little bit bigger, longer handle, because I thought it was going to become more comfortable for myself to use. And there is one, I don't know if you guys will be able to see that if I spin my camera. Let me do that quick. So over here on my sharpening station, I have that Rikon slow speed grinder, right? So it's right next to my bench vise or my machinist vise, and on the ground is my Tormac. Okay. And when my Tormac, my Rikon version of the Tormac is sitting up there, I have the Wolverine grinding jig for turning tools. Everything was too tight, and I didn't think this out when I put that bench in between the two stands. Everything was too tight. The handles wouldn't go out into the locked position. They were too long. They were running into the stuff. So I grabbed my hacksaw, and now that those handles are 2 inches shorter each, they work perfect. So, and I don't know. I kind of sat there for a second and thought to myself, do I really want to cut these handles off, or do I just put that Raycon grinder for my turning tools right in the middle of that bench? And when I need to use the wet grinder, I just pull it out from underneath. And I was like, you know what? That's stupid. Like, don't be a wuss. Cut those handles off, you know? So that's what I did. So, you know, and I guess in the world of turning too, there's a lot of times where we will modify a tool for a very particular cut, right? So from that standpoint, you know, and at that point, generally what I do is I don't like to modify my nice tools, because a lot of the time these are tools that I'm not going to use all the time. Very much like your skew chisel, right? Like you don't use that all the time. But like, for example, I recently, just like 2 weeks ago, went out and hit a flea market that I knew often had one vendor had a lot of turning tools there a lot of the times, and they're the less expensive, like Delta brand or Buffalo brand, whatever, a couple dollars, $3 or $4. And I need a spindle gouge to create a beading tool. So I'm going to do a couple bowls that have like the beehive rolled beads all the way up the side. So I needed a spindle gouge to just grind off and make a beading tool. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that to my nice Doug Thompson one. Like, I'll do that to a cheap Delta one that I paid $4 for. And is it as good as if I went out and bought a Robert Sorby beading tool? No. Yeah. Does it work
especially
the same?
For what you need it for?
It sure does. You know, like, yeah, I might have to exactly, and I might have to sharpen it a little bit more than I would if I bought a higher quality steel one. But I don't care. I mean, I'm like you said, for what I'm using it for, it's perfect. So, I mean, do you as you grind your chisel at 45 degrees to pare metal, for example, does that bother you that you're eating away at some of the steel on your chisel, or do you just not foresee yourself using it that much?
No, because it's not like I've done it a bunch of times to make it matter. And I guess I view it as, you know, that chisel is going to outlast me anyway, no matter what I'm doing, unless I'm using it to split pavers, you know, where. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was an issue I've always had with turning tools. And it's something that I kept hearing when I first started turning. It's like, oh, save the steel. Like, use a CBN wheel because it doesn't eat through as much steel as a traditional wheel will. And I'm like who's going to be sharpening their tools that much that you're going to eat through your steel? All of a sudden, I start doing a lot of turning. My tools are 2 inches shorter than they used to be. It's like, oh, crap. So when you talk about regrinding a bevel to do a particular task, that's the first thing that jumps to my mind. Is like, are you going to eat through all that hardened steel?
I guess
I don't know.
It's that point where I think of what Chris said, is that it's just a tool and it's meant to be used. If you're just grinding away on it, you know, like when you were a kid and you stood at the pencil sharpener and mowed a pencil down into a stub, you know, then it's becoming wasteful. But if it's in the service of getting that tool back into service, that's just the price of it. You know, I feel like that's worthwhile, you know. Yeah. And you know, I know that carvers will modify carving gouges to, you know, change the bevel angle or the sweep, or, you know, make a gouge more of a left-hand wing or a right-hand wing or something like that all the time. And I think even, you know, we don't really call it modifying a tool, but if you take a chisel, which has a primary bevel of 25 degrees, and you notice that the edge rolls often on it, and then you sharpen it instead at 30 or 35, you know, have you modified it? I would say you probably have. That's where it starts, you know, or replacing the handle, or you get a hand plane, a vintage hand plane that you're fixing up, but the tote is cracked. You know, if you replace the tote, you've modified the tool, you know, or return a knob on it,
that's
or,
true.
You know, the frog is cracked, so you find another frog that fits on it, or, all that kind of stuff. I've had a couple of hand saws where I replaced the handle on it. Not that the previous handle was necessarily bad or wrong.
Yeah.
One was cracked or broken or something like that. But, you make a shape that suits you or in a material that you like, or you just like doing it. And I feel like it's the same thing for power tools. Yeah. Like that bandsaw that I was talking about earlier. All the adjustments for the blade guides and the blocks and all that stuff was Allen wrenches. And I think it was 2 or 3 different size Allens for, to deal with all of that. And it's just stupid because I don't want to have to go hunting around in the shop for those Allen wrenches. So what I did is I pulled all the Allen screws out and replaced them with thumb screws. So I don't need a wrench at all. You can just do it all by hand. Nothing on the bandsaw guide assemblies requires you to have it wrenched tight. So.
Yeah. Which I've done that on my Powermatic too. The Powermatic I have actually came from our old video studio, and it was kind of a donor tool. It was one that had been stripped down, and it was sitting on cinder blocks when I got it, and missing a lot of parts. And you're right, there was a lot of Allen screws for the bearing assembly that I just replaced all with thumb screws because that's stupid. I hate Allen wrenches. I hate Allen wrenches on my tools. So, but I guess the whole point of me modifying a tool is to give me, if I do modify it, grinding handles aside to make that fit, is generally to give me a better experience, right? So thinking about some of the modifications that I have done or am going to do to the sawmill to make it easier to use, make it more convenient to use, and make it faster. So I guess there may be some aesthetic modifications you can make, like making a new handle for a saw. That's an aesthetic modification, right? Generally, I don't mess with that just because I have other stuff that I should be doing instead. But usually it's to either fix something that's broke, such as the handle on this slick, I think was split right down the center of it. So it was not usable. So generally it's to fix something that's broke or to give me a better experience or give me a better result.
But I also know that there's in the computer gadget world or even in the car world, there are people who, kind of consider that you don't really own something until you've opened it up and done something to it,
Yep.
And I think that there's a case to be made for that for a lot of woodworking tools. Like you could buy a vintage bandsaw, drill press, or table saw or something like that, swap out the stock motor for a motor that somebody actually cared about making, to get better speed or less vibration, better power or whatever, changing the belts to something that isn't a, lowest bidder kind of belt on it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel like when you guys have made modifications, it's like you get something and like, I'm going to change that right away? Or is it you use it for a while and like, maybe it would be better if I did this, or be more comfortable, or work better, or do a different task? Or
unless I knew that there was a flaw to begin with, you could buy an old power tool, for example, knowing that the motor is shot or the motor was undersized to begin with, and that's part of the appeal because you're getting it for $25 instead of $125. Then you can buy a decent motor on it, and it's an instant upgrade. But most of the time, I'm living with a tool a little bit, before, so that I know, so that the modification comes from a point of need in terms of the way I work or what I'm doing or what I want from this particular tool.
Yeah. I would say the only time that I ever do something immediately is exactly like Phil said, is if you know something's wrong, like the table saw I bought from Dylan, that I knew the motor was probably shot, and it was, and something like that. The only thing I ever do immediately on almost every tool, if it doesn't have it already, is I switch out the V belts for the drive link belts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. That's about the only thing I will do immediately, even if the belt doesn't really need replaced. Generally, I had bought like a 10-pack from, it was like a woodworker's garage sale in Altoona here. And I bought a 10-pack. He had like a box of 10 of them. So I had a handful of them. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I don't know why. But some of those older like unisaws had 3 drive belts on them to connect the trunnion or the arbor with the motor. So he had a bunch of them. So I swapped out on my old table side, old Steel City. I swapped that one. My old rigid drill press, I swapped that one out. So I just feel like it drives a little bit better. Mm-hmm. So that's the only time that I go into something saying, "Hey, I haven't even turned this on. I'm going to swap it first."
Yeah.
When it comes to, like switching the motor on a drill press or a bandsaw or a table saw, to me, that's completely need driven.
Yeah.
And most of the time, at least upgrading a motor to a higher horsepower motor, it's probably in my case, not worth the cost. Like unless you can find a used motor that happens to fit, and motors have, this is just in motors in particular, they happen to have different mounting styles, mounting plates. Some of them are suspended, some of them are hinge style, some of them bolt directly to a plate. Yeah. For instance, that table saw I bought from Dylan, I paid him a couple $100 for it, and a new motor was going to be $600. And I couldn't find a used one. The only used ones I could find on eBay were like 3-phase industrial motors, and I could get them for $200 or $300, but they're 3-phase. I would need a variable frequency drive to run them. So it's stuff like that. Or unless my bandsaw motor goes out, to me, it's not worth the investment to replace that motor for a couple $100. If that's the case, I would rather pocket that couple $100, sell my bandsaw, and buy a larger bandsaw. If that's the instance. If the motor goes out, it goes out. That's a different scenario altogether.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. I mean, I did buy a small, I don't remember what it was. It's the Stanley 110. I think it was a Montgomery Ward's version of it, block plane. Because I saw in an old Popular Woodworking, somebody had submitted as a tip where because those planes are so abundant, of changing that block plane into a rabbet block plane by cutting a rabbet mouth in one sidewall and then grinding a notch in the blade, and then you just basically scoot the blade over inside the plane so that it will basically turn it into a one-sided rabbeting block plane. Mm-hmm. I thought that looked kind of cool, so I did it. I found a plane, and this one needed it has a wood knob on the front, so I made a new knob for it, but cut that hole and modified the blade and did all the stuff for it. And then I had even drilled holes in the body of the plane to put little set screws so I could keep the blade where it needed to be, because it's not perfectly centered in there.
Yeah.
So that plane, I did that going into it just because I wanted to try it, because it looked like it was a ton of fun. And oddly enough, it works like a champ. It was kind of a fun way to take a tool that, that block plane isn't bad, but it's not good either. you know.
That's always how I judge my tools. Is it good or is it not good?
Yeah.
It's not half bad.
Yeah.
It's not half bad.
So I took a middling tool and made it into, a rabbiting block plane. And with a sharp blade, it does a great job. It's kind of fun to...
Well, and see, I guess from a hand tool standpoint, that's the perfect tool, in my opinion, to do that with. You know what I mean? And now that you say that, I have saved somewhere on my computer a picture of a 110. I have a 110 sitting somewhere. But anyways, somebody had bolted on. They had drilled holes in the sole and bolted on 45-degree guides to make it like a chamfer plane.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? That's a great idea, because 110s are basically the rabbits of the hand tool world, right? Like you put 2 of them in a cabinet, all of a sudden you have 40 of them.
Yeah.
And they're super abundant. Nobody's going to cry, unless it's a real early one. Nobody's going to cry that you modified the tool. So yeah, that's the perfect instance for that.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't do that to my Lee Nielsen block plane.
No, but I've seen people take old hand saws, where it's an old full length rip saw that's kind of been sharpened 9,000 times. And instead of it being a 26-inch long saw, they'll shorten it to a 22 and basically turn it into a panel saw, where you just cut down the nose and regrind it. And, that stuff isn't terribly difficult to do. And, there's just a ton of those kind of tools out there. Chisels are perfect tools to modify because there's millions.
Some of this leans into you're modifying it, but you're also saving it. You know what I mean? At the same time, like that instance, we've all seen them. The big long rip saws that have now the tooth line is it's like a rainbow, right? Because it's been sharpened 1,000 times just in the center, because that's where somebody saw it at.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a great save, in my opinion. The other option is to cut it into card scrapers. Mm-hmm. Perfectly valid, perfectly valid. And I've done that. I mean, I've bought distant D8 rip saws because I wanted the handle, because the handle was beautiful, but the plate was shot. It's like, I know I can sell that handle to somebody that needs that for their saw, and they can then have a complete saw. And I have a plate that I'm just going to chop into card scrapers. Perfect. It kind of falls along the same lines of, and this, I think when people first see this, they kind of get upset about it, but Bill Carter has always made his little tiny miter planes out of brass sawbacks.
Yeah.
And those of us in the U.S., vintage brass back saws are fairly uncommon. You don't see a ton of them.
Yeah.
Over there, they're the rabbits of the hand tool world, and Bill said it in one of his YouTube videos. He's like, people always throw a fit about me having 5-gallon buckets full of brass sawbacks. He's like, I get it. And the only thing that's left is the brass sawback. The plate's all rusted out. There's holes in the plates, He's like, why not? Why not reuse it and make it into something cool? Yeah. So, when it comes to modification, I think you're leaning into a saving territory too. You're saving a tool by modifying it to make it into something useful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I feel like there was something else that I was going to say about that, but I think what it is, another thing is that if you dig into a tool enough to modify it, you understand it on a totally different level, I believe, and know how to get more out of it and understand its function and its uses in a different way than if you're simply an operator of a tool.
Yeah. I will say it does hurt my tool seller soul a little bit when I walk into a flea market and there is a tool that I know what the tool is, but it's been modified in some way for a very particular reason, and I can't figure it out.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? Like
what's the story here?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think it's kind of cool in some regards. And there's a flea market or antique store here in town called the Brass Armadillo, and there's one tool in there that I just can't figure out what it is. And there's a couple people on some of our vintage tool Facebook groups that are also in Des Moines, and they've taken the photo of the same tool a bunch. And everyone's like, what is that? Like, nobody knows what it is. And it's like, you could see parts of a certain tool on it. Like, okay, those are, that's the lever cap of a Stanley 220, but like, we don't know what the rest of it is. And obviously somebody made it for some reason.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can't figure it out. So yeah, that hurts my tool seller soul a little bit to see that. It's different seeing something, what it is, like somebody bolting on chamfer guides. Okay, I get that. I see what that is. Or, I always like when I find a Stanley number 7, or it doesn't have to be a Stanley, but a number 7 jointer plane, and somebody has drilled holes in the sides to bolt on a plywood fence, so they have a 90-degree fence on it. It's like, I get what they did.
Yeah,
kind of ruined the value of it. Not necessarily. It's still a usable tool,
right.
But it have holes in your plane, which at that point, whoever did that didn't give two turds on the resale value of it. They knew that they couldn't get a 90-degree edge and they needed help, so they got help. So,
and I feel like that's a better use of the tool than having it bolted to the wall of a Cracker Barrel.
Yep. Let's not start on that.
So, all right. So, anybody who's been listening and has made it this far, congratulations. But we'd like to know what your opinions are on making and modifying tools for yourself. And maybe submit a couple of photos of what you've done to modify either your power tools or your workshop machines or your hand tools. And we'll post them with the show notes page for this episode. Otherwise, wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, or SoundCloud, or wherever, we'd love to hear from you. So give us a review and a rating. Help us get the ShopNotes podcast in front of more woodworkers like you. Otherwise, catch us again next week. See you next time on the ShopNotes podcast. Bye, everybody. I want to give another special thanks to Inventables, who sponsored this episode of the podcast. They're providing a new CNC solution for your business. You can make bigger projects faster with the X-Carve Pro. You can check it out in action at xcarvepro.com.